As of February 27th, the situation around the capital remained tense. After unsuccessful attempts to storm three key towns, Hostomel, Bucha and Irpin, invaders start accumulating forces for another push. Inside Kyiv, constant shellings and bombardments batter the city, but civilians, as well as government, tirelessly work to prepare for possibility of urban fights, encirclement, and evacuation of people from outskirt towns. Determination leaves no chance for panic, as first battles convince the public that Russians can and will be stopped. On the east, which we didn't cover in the series yet, as of February 27th, Russians mostly control highways reaching the outskirts of Nizhyn and Priluki, with two big convoys that travel to Kyiv. However, since many key towns such as Gluchiv, Sumy, Romny and Konotop are still contested by Ukrainians, these columns suffer the same shortages of food, fuel and ammunition as notorious 40-mile convoy to Kyiv that we discussed in the first part. On the north, Russians engage in very costly battles around Chernihiv, which is still under Ukrainian control even after being attacked from three sides by quite numerous Russian forces. This prevented invaders from marching right to Kyiv on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. Even though fierce battles still continued in Hostomel, Russians temporarily switched their focus to attempts to encircle the capital. In order to do this, it's first crucial to get control over the M06 highway that links Kyiv to Zhytomyr and acts as one of the important supply lines for city defenders. Russian 37th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade receives an order to take Makariv and then move to the south, cutting one Ukrainian supply line after the other, leaving the capital isolated from the west. However, the time that Russian forces spent trying to break through Bucha, Irpin and Hostomel was quite efficiently utilized by Ukrainians. The east of the capital was reinforced by fresh 14th Mechanized Brigade that just arrived from the city of Volodymyr on the west of Ukraine. They joined the battered but still quite capable 95th Air Assault Brigade. On February 27, 2022, multiple Russian columns almost reached Kyiv highway, but upon entering the town of Makariv, they are spotted by Ukrainian civilians, who inform authorities about tanks, armored personnel carriers and supply vehicles' arrival. Ukrainian 14th Mechanized and 95th Air Assault Brigades gather its forces just in time to start destroying the enemy that reached the highway all day long. During the heavy battles in the area, some Russian troops even tried to move in the direction of the capital. However, they quickly reached the dead end, as the bridge across Irpin River on the highway M06 was blown up preemptively on February 26. This hints that at some point, Russians again changed the plan and decided to temporarily forego encirclement and launch a flank attack on Kyiv, as most of the Ukrainian brigades are concentrated on the north of the city. Both encirclement and flank attack plans pretty much failed due to lack of control over Makariv, where on March 2nd, the Ukrainian forces pushed Russians out of the city and dig in, waiting for other columns of invaders. Russians, however, maintained control over the town of Moschun, blocking the highway but having no chance to utilize it for advance in any direction due to destroyed bridge and defenders' efforts. Apparently, the Ukrainian success around Makariv is also due to use of close air support of Mi-8 helicopters of the 16th Separate Army Aviation Brigade. The unit lost one Mi-8 with a crew consisting of Alexander Grigoriev, Dmitro Nesteryuk and Vasily Ignatyuk in the area on February 28th. Believing that Ukrainian air defenses are suppressed, Russians also start extensively using ground attack aircraft to support their advance at Makariv, Bucha and Irpin, losing Su-34, code 05 Red, near Buzova airfield on the same day. Russian Su-25, code 07 Red, from the 18th Attack Aviation Regiment is shot down and crashed near the village of Vyshegrad on March 2nd. Another Su-34, code 31 Red, from the 277th Bomber Aviation Regiment will be shot down near the village of Borodyanka on March 3rd. On the same day, near Babinci, a Russian K-52 attack helicopter is destroyed as well. In comparison, during these events, Ukraine loses a single MiG-29 fighter from the 40th Tactical Aviation Brigade, operated by Alexander Brinchala, who was killed in the accident. Overall, the Russians from now on start using and therefore losing more aircraft due to activity of Ukrainian SAM systems and fighter jets. On March 4th, Russians again launched an attack to capture half of Hostomel that they did not control with their VDV forces. They enter in column of BMDs and engage in urban warfare near the local glass factory with Ukrainian Special Forces of the Chief Directorate of Intelligence and 114th Territorial Defense Brigade, losing around 20 BMDs and around 50 soldiers. The following video shows aftermath. The skirmishes continue all day long, even after the main Russian forces are destroyed. The same tense situation also spreads to the town of Irpin, where Russians slowly grind into the city with constant attacks. On March 7th, Irpin and Hostomel are more than halfway controlled by Russian forces, even though Ukraine constantly tries to counterattack, contesting the towns in many areas. Russian aviation continues to work mostly in the area of Makariv and Irpin, losing on March 4th Su-25, code 04 Red, from the 18th Attack Aviation Regiment that crashed in Kodra. Specifically over Makariv, defenders also shot down the Russian Mi-8 helicopter, code 83 Blue. It may seem like the fate of Kyiv and Ukraine was decided only here or in the battles of Bucha, Irpin and Hostomel, but similarly fierce and important engagements simultaneously happen in other places around the capital. One of the most important engagements, the battle for Moschun, began on March 5th. The town was under the Ukrainian 72nd Mechanized Brigade that assisted in the initial attack on Hostomel airport, but now controls the front line along the Irpin River after blowing up all bridges across it. Russians deployed the 76th Guards Air Assault, 98th, 106th Guards Airborne Divisions, and 155th Separate Marine Brigade to establish pontoon bridges and cross the last natural defensive line of Kyiv in the area around Moschun. They expect that after the crossing, it will be easier to break through dense forests on the light and maneuverable BMDs, rather than engaging in costly urban combat in Bucha, Irpin and Hostomel. Therefore, Russians make Moschun their new main axis of advance, bringing an immense amount of artillery and conducting constant shellings and airstrikes on the positions of Ukrainians before entering the town. Close air support is provided by Russian helicopters, one of which, Mi-24, code 32 Red, was shot down by Ukrainian forces at Kozarovichi with the Polish-made Piorun pads. This town is also significant due to a dam that connects the two rivers, controlling the water level in the Irpin River. On March 5th, small groups of invaders enter Moschun, most likely for reconnaissance purposes. They engage in multiple skirmishes with small groups of Ukrainians in the town. The next day, the Russians set up first pontoon bridge and start a full-scale attack, pushing the company of the 72nd Brigade troops to the center of the town, while continuing heavy artillery strikes. Defenders bring reinforcements, as Georgian Legion joins the 72nd Brigade, but by March 11th, Russians concentrated way too much troops and armor near Moschun, forcing the defenders to retreat to the forests after suffering heavy casualties. After the retreat, Ukrainians managed to utilize pillboxes built during the siege of Kyiv in 1941 to organize the next defensive lines, so heavy battles persist. Even though Ukrainians are severely outnumbered in terms of their artillery, they execute pretty accurate strikes, disabling two pontoon bridges between March 5th and March 10th. A significant number of armored vehicles, however, have already crossed the river. Hidden in the forests, they are still spotted by Ukrainian drones, and rocket artillery opens fire once Russians were regrouping to continue the attack. Dozens of vehicles with crews are destroyed, which gives Ukrainians hope that the battle still can be won. However, after the defenders failed to destroy the last pontoon bridge with artillery, a massive Russian assault begins on March 11th. Both sides suffer heavy losses, so the commander of the outnumbered and battered 72nd Mechanized Brigade, Alexander Dovichenko, on March 14th offers the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, to retreat from Moschun. The general replied by saying that if 72nd Brigade retreated, then the road to Kyiv will be open, effectively authorizing the last stand battle, but offering the reinforcements. The 72nd Brigade fulfills its official motto, Ukraine or death, bringing all its reserve forces into the battle and changing the tactics. Dovichenko began to rotate troops every 3 days, explaining the decision by unprecedented density of shellings and cold weather. Note that at this time, the temperature was slightly below 0 degrees Celsius, making warfare even more complex. Eventually, Ukrainians reached the dam in Kozarovichi and blow it up, allowing the water level in Irpin to rise approximately by 2 meters. The strong current sweeps the last pontoon bridge and floods Russian positions and armor, leaving Moschun isolated from the main Russian forces. A few days later, Ukrainian units reinforced with the 114th Territorial Defense Brigade and Special Operation Forces swiftly counterattack Russians, encircling Moschun and destroying cut out and weakened invaders. Only a few units have managed to cross the river by swimming across it, after leaving all their equipment on the river bank. By March 22nd, the Ukrainian armed forces completely restored the positions on the Irpin River, effectively ending the battle and foiling all Russian attempts to enter Kyiv through this area. At the same time, the battle was raging again around Makariv. After Ukrainians counterattacked and pushed Russians out of the town on March 2nd, invaders started accumulating forces to get control over the M06 highway and then either go to south to complete the encirclement or go straight into Kyiv. Even though invaders reached the road in multiple locations to the east of the Makariv, on March 5th, this town remains a crucial target as Ukrainians contest the highway by controlling it. After attacking the town from the air on March 7th, invaders lose one Su-25, code 28 Yellow, from the 266th Attack Aviation Regiment, which crashed near the village of Mirotsky. This was one of the last confirmed destroyed invaders' aircraft in the area, which hints that after significant losses, Russian aviation halted most of its operations around Kyiv in the middle of the March. The aerial attacks persisted, but the apparent risk-averse strategy in place significantly lowered their efficiency. On March 8th evening, after heavy fighting in the area around Makariv, 3 Ukrainian T-64BV tanks of the 14th Mechanized Brigade received information that the Russian column approaches the town. They set up an ambush, and once they see the enemy in their sights, they open fire. After the leading Russian T-72 is destroyed and a few other vehicles are damaged, Russians dispersed into the town and called for artillery support, thinking that they were attacked by a large number of Ukrainian troops. Ukrainians continued devastating the column, setting ablaze a few other vehicles. Crew of the Ukrainian T-64BV decides to outflank the column to get a better position. They move swiftly, continue their accurate shots with high explosive fragmentation shells into the enemy troops, when suddenly the Russian ATGM hits the tank, causing the ammunition detonation and killing the crew. All 3, Sergei Vasich, Vitaly Parkhomyuk, and Oleg Svenchuk, will be posthumously awarded the title of Hero of Ukraine. 2 other Ukrainian tanks retreat as their mission to stall the convoy is completed. In total, tank crews destroy 6 Russian vehicles. Nevertheless, as fierce fights continues during the course of March, Makariv is occupied by Russian forces and recaptured by Ukrainians multiple times. The town is practically destroyed by constant urban combat and artillery strikes. However, even though Russians control Motizhin, Kopelev, Severenivka, Berezivka, and Havronchina, at some point the defenders do not give up, as they understand the importance of locking as many Russian forces as possible here to prevent them going directly to Kyiv. To the west of Kyiv, on March 9th, a column of Russian armored vehicles advances from the north, in between the villages of Zalyssia and Skybyn. It consists of the troops and armor of the Russian 90th Guards Tank Division. Since Ukrainians had time to prepare for an attack, the column travels right towards the ambush set up by the 72nd Mechanized Brigade. The Ukrainian drones verify the reports that the column consists mostly of tanks and IFVs, so the defenders, who do not possess even a half of what the enemy does in terms of the armor, have to rely on surprise, ATGMs, and superior tactics. Roman Darmohrai, a battalion commander of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, orders to place the Ukrainian anti-tank guided missiles system Stugna-P in the fields near the village of Skybyn. The group of soldiers armed with British-made and low ATGMs is placed on the side of the road, closer to the village of Zalyssia. They are the first ones to meet the enemy. As the column approaches the ambush site, Ukrainians hit the Russian tank with an NLAW missile, which penetrates and sets it on fire as it continues rolling down the road. 2 out of 3 crew members escape. Another NLAW missile hits the bushes or simply malfunctions. Some IFVs and tanks try to lay suppressive fire, while others drive in random directions. The Ukrainian ambush is masked well, so the tanks have to shoot randomly through the bushes. It's clear because once one of the tanks makes a shot, it's immediately hit by the grenade launcher or missile in exchange. This is a video of this exact ambush, after which the column regroups and continues moving towards Kyiv and the second ambush. There is also evidence of activity of Ukrainian attack helicopters in the area, one of which, Mi-24, operated by the 16th Separate Army Aviation Brigade, was shot down near the village of Lazhentsy on March 8th. Both crew members, Alexander Marynyak and Ivan Bezub, did not survive. On the same day, Ukrainian Mi-8, code 133, operated by the 11th Separate Army Aviation Brigade, was shot down by Russian forces near the village of Bervitsa. While crew members Oleg Henichkor and Igor Moroz lost their lives, 2 other pilots were captured by Russians and later returned back after prisoner exchange. Ukraine also lost 1 MiG-29 fighter aircraft near Berezivka. The pilot of the 40th Tactical Aviation Brigade, Andriy Lutashin, was killed in action. In the village of Skybyn, the column mentioned above enters a narrow part of the road, where tanks are targeted by Stugna missile, and then artillery. The fatal mistake is that vehicles were way too close to each other, so the artillery shots of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade are extremely effective. By the time the column retreated, it had lost 17 tanks, 3 other armored vehicles, and dozens of men.
Нитро, я удар.
Алло,
Нитро, я удар. Слушаю тебя.
удар я Нитро. 6-й полк почти потерял.
Что?
6-й полк пока не могу доложить, пока собираю. Очень много потерь. Ждали. Голова колонны попала в засаду. Командир полка погиб. По остальным разбираюсь.
Сейчас как разберешься, всех соберешь, мне доложишь, как понял.
Оттуда били артиллерия, танки. С беспилотника, так я понял, Байрактары летает. По остальным сейчас потерям разбираюсь.
The commander of the column, Colonel Andriy Zakharov, is severely wounded in attack and dies later this day. The column has to retreat from Skybyn, engaging in the battles to the east of the village, but never entering Kyiv. For the rest of the battles in the area, Russian troops mostly stayed around the village of Plotske, Svetylny, Hrebenki, and Nova Basань, and did not undertake more serious attempts to enter the city, as troops were very poorly supplied due to overextended logistical lines and failure to take complete control over Sumy region. Approximately between March 10th and March 22nd, on strategic level, the battle enters the stalemate phase. Ukraine maintains full control over Kyiv, but heavy battles still rage around Irpin, Makariv, Moschun, and on the east of Brovary. The 40-mile convoy through Ivankiv dissolved, as ambushes and lack of supplies forced Russians to hide inside nearby towns and loot them instead of reaching Kyiv. As almost a month passes after the first Russian attempts to take over the capital, it becomes clear that the so-called Russian blitzkrieg failed. Invaders got stuck in costly urban combat on the north and mostly positional warfare on the east and west. A large number of vehicles were lost in columns, so the leftovers were thinly dispersed to support infantry, making impossible any kind of swift breakthrough. To be fair, any attempts of such breakthrough could be extremely risky due to the abundance of the modern anti-tank weapons, such as Javelin and Enlov. These systems played a crucial role in repelling the first attack on the capital, due to the fire and forget principle. This means that ambush teams do not have to be thoroughly trained to operate them and can retreat right after the shot. This crucial advantage allows Ukrainians to cripple Russian supply lines that initially were quite unreliable due to multiple bridges destroyed and quite complex terrain. Across the front lines, the artillery duels persisted, but since Ukrainians use way more commercial and military reconnaissance drones than the Russians, they often can get better results with less equipment and ammo. This was extremely significant around Moschun, where the 72nd Mechanized Brigade eventually learned how to promptly destroy Russian pontoon bridges. As Western allies see that Ukraine is not likely to fall anytime soon, the military aid transition rates ramp up. The stalemate phase ends approximately on March 22nd, when Ukraine switches from the defense to offense, trying to push Russians out of the multiple fronts around the capital. Between March 22nd and March 24th, Ukrainians pushed Russians in Irpin and Makariv, while also completely liberating Velika Dymarka and Lukyanivka in the east with assistance of the 10th Mountain Air Assault Brigade that had just arrived from the west of Ukraine. Worth noting that Kostus-Kalinovsky regiment of Belarusian volunteers assisted on both of these directions as well. On March 28th, Makariv, Motyzhin and Irpin are also completely recaptured by Ukrainians. The next day, Russia announces that its forces will be withdrawn from the Kyiv area, explaining it as a gesture of goodwill. In a matter of next 4 days, Russians swiftly abandon positions and retreat towards Belarus, thoroughly mining everything that they can. This was to ensure that Ukrainians will not be able to attack them during the retreat. It's also possible that Russians foresee the possible encirclement near Kyiv. The main reason for retreat, however, was the inability of Russian forces to supply their troops, which led to the poor performance and the courage with which many Ukrainian civilians and armed forces of Ukraine fought. This leads to the conclusion that the initial Russian plan indeed counted on absence of resistance and swift capital takeover with VDV forces deployed from the plains in Hostomel, or at least with forces that arrived from Belarus. We already discussed the heavy bet on airlift in separate video about the battle for Hostomel airport, so take a look if you are interested in details. It's also important to mention over a dozen of smaller units that helped to defend Kyiv, but were not included in the video to keep things relatively simple. It's reported that some elements of the 30th and 53rd Mechanized Brigades, 58th Motorized and 44th Artillery Brigades, 39th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, and 831st Tactical Aviation Brigade were involved in the battle. Additionally, over 7 National Guard brigades assisted the armed forces of Ukraine in operations around Kyiv. Out of less conventional units, volunteer formations such as Svoboda Battalion, Ukrainian Volunteer Corps, Ukrainian Volunteer Army, Chechen Sheikh Mansour and Johar Dudayev battalions, as well as 49th Separate Infantry Battalion, fought around the capital. This list could be expanded further, but the point that should be made is that Kyiv was saved by immense efforts of the whole Ukrainian nation, which defended its right to exist against all the odds. Many pro-Russian sources claim that the attack on capital was a distraction that allowed Russia to make early gains in the east and south of Ukraine. This doesn't make sense if we look closer into the composition of the Russian forces involved. Kyiv was attacked by elite Russian VDV units, which were used as expendables in many places, but still possessed quite a threat to Ukrainians, in particular inflicting heavy casualties for the 72nd, 79th, 80th and 95th Ukrainian brigades. The National Guard units, such as anti-riot police, OMON and SOBR, as well as extremely loyal to Ramzan Kadyrov, Chechen 131st Special Motorized Regiment, also do not fit the type of the troops that could be used for distraction attack. These units would be useful for suppressing protests and establishing control over the city. The helicopter raid at Hostomel airport was also a risky operation, but if Kyiv was not a target at all, why would Russia perform it? Summarizing, there is no real evidence that Russia did not plan to take Kyiv, so with high degree of certainty, the attack was indeed a strategic failure of the Russian forces due to many tactical blunders, especially logistical ones. In June 2023, Vladimir Putin also presented his version of events, explaining the retreat from Kyiv by some kind of treaty that was reached after negotiations early in the war.
Договор о постоянном нейтралитете и гарантиях безопасности Украины.
The documents briefly shown, however, simply list the demands of two parties, Russia and Ukraine, to the structure and equipment of Ukrainian military, so it simply encompasses suggestions of two sides, which could not be some kind of a binding agreement.
Парафирован киевской делегацией. Подпись стоит. Но после того, как мы, как и обещали, отвели войска от Киева, киевские власти, как обычно, делают их хозяева, выбросили это все.
Even though it was mentioned, no signatures or any other kind of verification was not shown on the documents, so the authenticity should be questioned as well. This version is also quite weak, as the Russian president did not provide the full text of what should look like an agreement, and even did not clearly explain what Russia wanted or got in exchange for retreating from outskirts of capital. Obviously, the battle became a huge victory for Ukraine, and first, but not the last major counteroffensive. Even though Russian forces decided to withdraw rather than fight Specifically, the way Ukrainian command conducted operations in the area led to that. Invaders also withdrew from Chernihiv and Sumy, essentially losing all positions of the north of Ukraine, except around the city of Kharkiv. We also have a separate detailed video about the battles around this city. Unfortunately, besides many casualties in the armed forces, the loss of territory also meant a month-long occupation for many civilians. While some were forced to spend almost all this time in basements, others became the victims of the numerous inhumane war crimes committed by Russian troops. The atrocities that were uncovered when Ukraine retrieved control of such towns as Bucha and Irpin most likely became the reason why further peace talks were halted despite the famous gestures of goodwill.